After my daughter stole my lakeside villa to house her in-laws, she thought I'd just fade away quietly. She forgot I'm a builder by trade, and I just turned my home into a high-tech psychological trap they'll never escape. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The deed to my villa sat in my safe, yet my daughter stood on my terrace and told me I was trespassing. 2 sentences, that was the verdict, and the loss was already in motion. I stood on the gravel driveway of my Lake Tahoe retreat, my fingers trembling against the handle of my weekend bag. Above me, the afternoon sun turned the crystal water of the lake into a sheet of silver, but all I could see were the two figures in white bathrobes looking down at me like they owned the sky. My daughter, Kelly, leaned against the railing with a coldness I didn't recognize. Behind her, her husband Palmer shifted his weight, looking everywhere except at my eyes. "Dad, you can't stay here," Kelly called out. Her voice was sharp, a jagged piece of glass cutting through the mountain air. "Palmer and I are planning a romantic weekend." I blinked, the mountain air suddenly feeling thin. This was my villa. I had picked every tile in that kitchen. I had paid for every inch of cedar on that terrace with 30 years of 12-hour days in San Diego construction. My wife, Elizabeth, and I had built this place to be our sanctuary, the spot where we would grow old together. Since she passed 3 years ago, these walls were the only place I still felt her breath. "But Kelly," I started, my voice trailing off as the absurdity hit me. "This is my home." "I don't care," she said, her mug hitting the railing with a sharp clink. "We were here first, and we're not leaving. You're just in the way anyway." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. In the way? I looked at my only child, the girl I had carried on my shoulders, the one I had comforted at her mother's funeral. She was 28 years old, and she was ordering me off my own land like I was a wandering stranger. Palmer's face was flushed red above his bathrobe collar, but he didn't say a word to stop her. "Fine," I heard myself say. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. "Fine, I'll go." I bent to pick up my bag, my knees creaking with a sound that reminded me I was 62 and suddenly very alone. Kelly didn't offer a hug or an apology. She just watched me. "Next time, call first," she shouted as I turned toward my car. I climbed into my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. In the rearview mirror, I saw Kelly raise her coffee mug in a gesture that might have been a toast or a final goodbye. I backed out of the driveway, the smooth purr of my engine the only reliable thing left in my world. The 2-hour drive back to the city felt like a slow retreat from a battlefield I hadn't even known I was fighting on. Monday evening found me in my study in San Diego, the silence of the house pressing against my ears. I was nursing a lukewarm coffee when the phone rang. I picked it up, hoping for an apology. "Dad," Kelly's voice was cold and businesslike. "Listen carefully. Palmer and I have decided. The villa now belongs to his parents." My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. "What? Kelly, what are you talking about?" "Carl and Margaret Thompson," she said, her words dropping like heavy stones into still water. "It's their home now. You're forbidden from going there anymore." The leather of my chair creaked as I sat forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Kelly, have you lost your mind? You can't just take my property. I worked 3 decades for that place." "Actually, I can and I am," she snapped. "You hardly use it anyway, and they desperately need proper housing." "You're being ridiculously selfish after everything we've done for you since Mom died. Everything you've done for me?" I felt something snap inside my chest. "I paid for your wedding. I paid $15,000 for your ceremony without asking for a single receipt. I paid $25,000 for Palmer's SUV just 8 months ago because you said you needed reliable transport. I paid $40,000 for your graduate school when you kept switching majors. That's what fathers do," she cut me off. "Besides, you're old and alone now. What do you possibly need with such a big villa?" The phrase "old and alone" echoed in my head. I looked at the silver-framed photo of Elizabeth on my desk. She had always told me to be patient with Kelly, to give her time to grieve. But this wasn't grief. This was a calculated theft of my life's work. "No," I said. The word was steady. surprising even me. "What did you just say?" Kelly's voice crackled with sudden surprise. I said no, Kelly. "The answer is no. Palmer's parents can find their own housing." "You're a monster," she hissed. "Mom would be ashamed of you." I hung up. For the first time in 3 years, I ended the conversation on my terms. I turned off the phone and sat in the dark. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a man with a plan, and my daughter had just given me a deadline. Palmer's parents were moving in this Sunday. I opened my laptop and began researching California property statutes with the same methodical precision I used to win multi-million-dollar construction bids. I didn't need patience. I needed leverage. I reached out to my neighbor, Derek, a tech genius who owed me a massive favor from a flooding incident last winter. I knocked on his door at 9 on Tuesday morning. "Fred?" Derek asked, squinting through his glasses. "Everything okay?" "I need your help with a creative technical project," I said, stepping inside. "I want to turn my villa into a house of the future." A surprise for some guests who think they've already moved in. Derek's eyes lit up behind his wire rims. "Home automation?" "Something like that," I said. "I want motion sensors, voice assistants, and lighting effects. I want the house to speak to them." 2 hours later, we were loading his SUV with motion detectors, programmable LED strips, wireless speakers, and hidden cameras. As we drove toward Tahoe, Derek explained the possibilities of cascading responses. Motion triggers lights, lights trigger voices, and voices trigger the water system. We reached the villa by noon and began the installation. We mounted devices no larger than smoke alarms in every corner. We hid cameras behind bookshelves and programmed a tablet to control the entire network. By 3 in the afternoon, the trap was set. "Walk into the living room," Derek said, holding the tablet. I stepped through the entryway. Immediately, the lights began strobing in a disorienting pattern. A booming voice echoed from hidden speakers. "This property belongs to Fred Martinez. You are trespassing. Leave now." The sound of rushing water started in the kitchen as the faucets turned on full blast. It was terrifying, unsettling, and completely legal. "They're going to get the surprise of their lives on Sunday," Derek said with a grin. I looked around the peaceful-looking villa, knowing the technological web that now lay beneath its surface. I checked my phone. A text from Kelly sat on the screen. "Palmer's parents found a moving company for Sunday," it read. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I deleted the message without replying and looked out at the lake. The game was on. Wednesday morning arrived with a new layer of strategy. Derek was back at my door with even more equipment. He had spent the night dreaming up ways to make the villa even more atmospheric. He brought industrial batteries to hide in the basement so the system couldn't be shut off by flipping a breaker. He brought projectors that could cast moving shadows on the walls. "They're going to think the house is alive," Derek said as we drove back up the mountain. We spent the day installing the backup power and the projectors. We programmed the audio system to layer sounds, footsteps in empty hallways, whispered voices, and the sound of wind blowing through closed windows. The effect was psychological warfare disguised as a smart home demonstration. We even crafted a sign for the front door. "Welcome to the house of the future. Enter at your own risk." To a stranger, it looked like a tech showcase. To my daughter, it was a warning she would surely ignore. I monitored the system from my tablet in San Diego on Thursday and Friday. I watched the empty rooms through the high-definition lenses, waiting for the invasion. Kelly was silent now, likely busy coordinating the movers. She assumed I had crawled into a hole to die of shame. She had no idea I was sitting in my study, watching my monitors like a commanding officer. Saturday night, I didn't sleep. I replayed every time I had said yes to her over the last 3 years. Every check, every car, every debt I had cleared. I realized I hadn't been a good father. I had been a resource. I had trained her to see me as an ATM. That realization hardened the last soft part of my heart. Sunday, May 4th, arrived. At 2 in the afternoon, a dark blue minivan appeared on the approach road camera, right on schedule. Kelly emerged from the passenger side, her hair catching the sun as she looked at the villa with the eyes of a conqueror. Palmer followed, helping his parents, Carl and Margaret, out of the car. They were carrying suitcases and boxes, ready for a permanent relocation. They gathered at the back of the van, laughing and pointing at the house. Margaret held a pair of house slippers, already planning her comfort. They approached the front door as a unified group, 4 people certain of their right to my life's work. Margaret stopped at the sign. "What is this nonsense?" she asked, her voice clear through the audio pickup. "Just Dad being weird," Kelly said with a sharp laugh. "Don't worry about it, this is your house now." Margaret yanked the sign from the wall and threw it onto the gravel. I watched them step over it and enter. Palmer used a key I hadn't given him, a copy Kelly must have made years ago. They walked into the entryway, their voices echoing with delight. "Make yourselves at home," Kelly announced. "This place is yours." I leaned back in my chair in San Diego. My finger hovered over the execute button on my smartphone. "Not yet," I whispered. "Let them get comfortable." I watched them through the cameras for hours. They unpacked. They ate dinner at my table. They sat in my chairs. By 10 in the evening, they were settling into the bedrooms. Kelly and Palmer took the master suite. Carl and Margaret took the guest room. I waited until I saw the lights go out and the movement stop. At exactly midnight, I pressed the button. The villa erupted. Every light in the house began strobing in rapid flashes of red and white. The peaceful bedrooms became disorienting environments of chaos. Simultaneously, water began pouring from every shower and faucet in the house. The roar of the pipes joined the technological assault. Kelly bolted upright in bed. I could see her silhouette against the flashing lights. Palmer scrambled beside her, shouting. Then, the voice assistant boomed through the house. "Attention, unauthorized intrusion detected. You are not the owners of this house. Leave immediately." In the guest room, Margaret screamed. Derek's projectors were casting dark, moving figures across the walls, shapes that seemed to pace and watch them. Carl stumbled out of bed, his face pale with terror. "What's happening?" Margaret shrieked. "Carl, do something. I don't know." He yelled back over the sound of the rushing water. The more they ran, the more the house reacted. Motion sensors triggered louder warnings and faster strobes. Kelly appeared in the hallway, her confidence shattered. She looked like a lost child. Palmer tried to find the breaker box, but the battery backups kept the nightmare running. Warning, the voice boomed again. "Security protocols activated. Occupants will be removed." Palmer reached the front door and yanked on the handle. It wouldn't budge. Derek had programmed a 30-second lock delay to induce a moment of pure claustrophobic panic. "The doors won't open," Palmer screamed. I watched them through the monitors, 4 people reduced to terror by the very property they tried to steal. Kelly was turning in circles in the living room, shadows dancing around her. The woman who told me I was in the way was now cowering in a corner. Exactly 6 minutes after the sequence began, I released the locks. They didn't wait. They stumbled out of the house into the cold mountain air, leaving their half-unpacked boxes behind. They scrambled into the minivan and sped away, the taillights disappearing into the pines. My phone rang at 7:30 Monday morning. "What did you do?" Kelly screamed. Her voice was ragged with exhaustion. "Margaret and Carl are traumatized. They're barely coherent." I kept my voice gentle and confused. "Kelly, what are you talking about? How was your night at the villa?" "Don't you dare," she hissed. "The house went insane. Lights, water, voices. It was a nightmare." I made a sympathetic clicking sound. "That sounds terrifying. Did you call the police?" "We did," she sobbed. "They found nothing. They said it was a malfunction." "Well, that's a relief," I said. "At least you're safe. These modern systems can be unpredictable. Maybe the house just doesn't like strangers staying there." The silence on the other end lasted a long time. "I know it was you," she whispered. "Kelly, I'm in San Diego," I said. "I can barely work my TV remote, you know that." She hung up, but I knew the victory wasn't complete. She was a fighter, and she would try again. Tuesday morning proved me right. I watched the villa cameras and saw a locksmith's truck pull into the driveway. Palmer had hired a professional to change the locks and disable the system. I sat with my coffee and watched the show. The locksmith spent 30 minutes examining the door before shaking his head. "These aren't regular locks, sir," I heard him say through the audio feed. "It's a biometric smart home network. I can't touch this without a tech specialist. Palmer kicked the doorframe in frustration. The locksmith drove away, leaving Palmer alone on the porch. He looked small, defeated by a piece of hardware he didn't understand. By Tuesday evening, they were at my front door in San Diego. Kelly's knock was so hard it rattled the glass. I opened the door and found her flushed with rage, Palmer standing behind her with his fists clenched. "Open the villa," Kelly demanded, pushing her way into my entryway. "Palmer couldn't change the locks because you turned it into a fortress." "Smart home security is very popular these days," I said mildly. "It protects against unauthorized access." Palmer stepped into my space, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "Either you give us the villa right now or you forget you have a daughter." "Is that a threat or a promise?" I asked, meeting his eyes. Kelly's eyes blazed. "We'll sue you for harassment, for emotional distress." "We have friends, Dad. We'll ruin your reputation. You'll die alone and forgotten, just like Mom." The mention of Elizabeth should have hurt, but it only confirmed that I was doing the right thing. My daughter was willing to use her mother's memory as a weapon to steal a house. "I think you should leave," I said quietly. "You'll never see your grandchildren." Kelly shrieked as Palmer pulled her back toward the car. "They'll never even know you existed." I watched them drive away, their shadows long in the streetlights. I went back to my study and looked at the silver frame on my desk. Elizabeth's smile was a reminder of what we had built together. I wasn't just protecting a house, I was protecting her legacy. The next morning, Wednesday, I took the final step. I didn't go to a lawyer to fight for the deed. I went to Bradley Walsh's office, a notary I had used for 15 years. I had invited Kelly and Palmer to join me for a resolution. They walked into the conference room at 10 sharp, looking smug. They thought I was surrendering. Carl and Margaret were there too, sitting along the wall, still looking jumpy from the mountain incident. "All right, Dad," Kelly said, sitting across from me. "We're here for the papers. Transfer the villa to Palmer's parents now, and we can put this behind us." I gestured to Bradley. "I'm afraid that's impossible," I said. Palmer leaned forward. "Nothing's impossible if you just sign the names." "I don't own the villa anymore," I said. The room went silent. Kelly's face drained of color. "What does that mean?" Palmer demanded. Bradley opened a folder. "Mr. Martinez transferred ownership of the Lake Tahoe property to the Second Chance Foundation for Homeless Assistance on Monday morning. The transfer is legal and irreversible." Kelly stood up so fast her chair screeched. "You can't do that. That villa is ours." "I had every right to donate my property to charity," I said. "You tried to steal it." This felt like a more appropriate use of the space. Margaret Thompson started to cry. "Where will we live?" she asked. "You'll have to make other arrangements," I said, "just as you expected me to do when you tried to evict me." Palmer's voice was a whisper. "Our future... We counted on that villa to solve our debts. Maybe you should have asked permission before betting on my death," I replied. Bradley spread more documents. The transfer includes a lifetime usage clause for Mr. Martinez. He retains full access until his passing. Only after that does the foundation take physical possession. "So nothing changes for you?" Kelly's voice was climbing toward hysteria. "You still get to use it?" "Everything changes," I corrected her. "You no longer have any claim to it. Ever. Not now, and not when I'm gone." Kelly looked at me with pure hatred, but the fight was gone from her eyes. She realized she had lost everything because she couldn't wait for her inheritance. She had tried to take it by force, and I had simply moved the target. "Next time you try to manipulate someone," I said as they filed out of the room, "remember that 30 years of business experience beats emotional terrorism every time." The door clicked shut. I sat with Bradley in the silence, feeling the weight of 3 years of grief finally lift from my shoulders. "Masterfully planned, Fred," Bradley said. I gathered my copies of the deeds. "I think I'll head up to the lake," I said. "I hear it's peaceful this time of year." The drive back to Lake Tahoe on Thursday morning was the most peaceful journey of my life. The spring landscape was vibrant, the greens of the pines deep and rich against the blue of the sky. I wasn't checking my phone. I wasn't looking in the rearview mirror for a minivan. I was just a man going home. I used my key and stepped into the villa. It smelled of cedar and the faint scent of the lake. The first thing I did was take down the cameras. I removed the motion sensors and packed the speakers into boxes. I didn't need the theater anymore. The house was mine again. I spent the afternoon restoring the rooms. I moved the furniture back to where Elizabeth had wanted it. I cleared out the half-packed boxes Palmer's parents had left in their flight. I found a pair of Margaret's slippers under the guest bed and tossed them into the trash without a second thought. By evening, I was sitting on the terrace with a fresh cup of coffee. The lake was a mirror reflecting the first stars of the night. I thought about the strange mathematics of family. Kelly had calculated that her pressure would break me. She hadn't accounted for the fact that a man who has lost his wife has already faced his greatest fear. There was nothing left she could take that mattered more than my dignity. I realized then that I had been teaching her the wrong lessons for years. By saying yes to every demand, I had told her that my love was a commodity. By setting this boundary, I was finally being a father. I was showing her that actions have consequences. I sat there for hours listening to the water lap against the private pier. For the first time in 3 years, I felt Elizabeth's presence without the sharp edge of pain. I had protected the sanctuary we built. I had kept the promise of our life together. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from an unknown number. I opened it. It was from Carl Thompson. "Fred, we're sorry," it read. "We didn't know Kelly was doing this behind your back. We're staying in a motel now. We just wanted you to know." I deleted it. Whether they knew or didn't know wasn't my problem. They had stood on my terrace in my bathrobes. They had walked through my door with moving boxes. They had been willing participants in the theft of a man's home. I turned the phone off and watched the moon rise over the peaks. The silence was magnificent. Friday morning brought a knock at the door. I felt a momentary spike of tension, my hand tightening on the kitchen counter. I walked to the entryway and looked through the side light. It wasn't Kelly, it was Derek. "Just checking to see if the house of the future survived the night," he said with a grin when I opened the door. I laughed and stepped aside. "It survived. I've already packed up most of your gear." Derek walked into the living room, looking at the spots where his sensors had been. "You know, that was the most sophisticated setup I've ever done. That sequence at midnight was legendary. It worked exactly as it needed to," I said, handing him a box of speakers. "You saved my home, Derek." He shrugged, his expression turning serious. "My dad went through something similar with my sister. He didn't have a smart home to help him. He just lost everything. I'm glad you fought back." We spent an hour loading the rest of the equipment into his SUV. Before he left, he handed me a small thumb drive. "The footage from Sunday night," he said, "just in case they ever try to sue you for harassment. It shows them breaking your sign and entering without a care in the world. It's your insurance policy." I took the drive, feeling the weight of it in my palm. "Thank you." I spent the rest of the day in the garden. I trimmed the mountain laurels and cleared the pine needles from the stone paths. I worked until my muscles ached, a good, honest pain that cleared the fog from my mind. As the sun began to set, I realized I had a decision to make. I could live here in isolation, or I could find a way to let the world back in. The Second Chance Foundation would eventually own this place, but for now, it was mine. I went inside and picked up the photo of Elizabeth. "I'm okay," I whispered to the empty room. I knew Kelly wouldn't call for a long time, maybe never. That was the price of justice. It was a steep one, but as I looked out at the lake, I knew I would pay it again 1,000 times over. I was 62 years old, and for the first time in my life, I truly understood the value of my own peace. I sat on the terrace as the shadows lengthened across the water. The villa was quiet, the lake was still, and my heart was finally at rest. I reached for my coffee, but my hand stopped. On the pier below, a single white bathrobe was caught in the wooden pilings, fluttering in the breeze like a white flag. It was the one Palmer had dropped in his panic. I watched it for a long time, a ghost of the battle I had won. Then, I went back inside and locked the door. The white fabric of the bathrobe snagged on the pier felt like a ghost haunting my victory. I walked down the wooden steps, the lake air cooling my face, and yanked the damp terry cloth free from the pilings. This was the physical proof of Palmer's cowardice, a discarded skin left behind when the lights got too bright. I didn't burn it or throw it in the trash. I folded it neatly and left it on the very edge of the property line, right where the gravel met the public road. It was a boundary marker, a silent message that the man who lived here was no longer a resource to be harvested. I returned to my study and opened the laptop, my fingers hovering over the keys. My daughter had threatened to turn the world against me, to use her social circles and Palmer's parents to paint me as a senile monster. In the construction business, a reputation is built over 30 years and can be leveled in 30 minutes. I wasn't going to wait for her to start the demolition. I pulled up my email and drafted a message to the board of the Second Chance Foundation. I invited the executive director to the villa for a meeting on Tuesday. If the house was going to belong to them eventually, it was time they saw the asset they were inheriting. But as I hit send, my phone buzzed with a notification from a shared banking app I had forgotten was still linked to Kelly's emergency account. A withdrawal of $5,000 had just been authorized. My pulse spiked, not from the loss of the money, but from the sheer audacity. Even after the defeat at the notary's office, she was still reaching into my pockets. I didn't call her. I didn't scream. I opened the banking portal and severed the link, closing the account entirely and moving the remaining balance to a private trust. It was a clinical, quiet action, a digital lock clicking into place. Within 10 minutes, the phone rang. Kelly's name flashed on the screen, a silent demand for an explanation. I watched it vibrate across the mahogany desk until it went dark. The silence that followed was heavy. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water, watching my reflection in the dark window. I looked like a man who had won a war but lost his home in the process. My daughter was a thief, but she was still my daughter. The cruelty she had displayed on the terrace wasn't something she had learned from me or Elizabeth. It was a mutation of entitlement, a weed I had watered with my own indulgence for 28 years. A sudden, sharp thud echoed from the front of the house. I froze, the glass halfway to my lips. It wasn't a knock. It was the sound of something heavy hitting the wooden door. I walked to the entryway, my heart thudding against my ribs, and looked through the side light. A man stood on the porch, his face obscured by a baseball cap, holding a thick stack of papers. He wasn't Palmer, and he wasn't a locksmith. He looked up, and I saw the badge clipped to his belt. "Mr. Martinez," he called out, his voice muffled by the glass. "I have a temporary restraining order and a notice of a mental competency hearing." The air in the hallway turned to ice. Kelly wasn't trying to steal the house anymore. She was trying to take my personhood. I didn't open the door. I walked back to my study and called Marcus Chen, my attorney. My voice was a low, steady rasp as I explained the man on the porch. Marcus didn't sound surprised. He sounded like a man who had seen children do far worse for far less. "She's playing the incapacity card, Fred," Marcus said, the sound of papers rustling through the line. "She's claiming your irrational behavior at the villa, the lights, the voices, is proof of a mental breakdown. She's using your own defense against you." "Can she do that?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone until my knuckles went white. "She can try," Marcus replied. "But she made one fatal mistake. She filed the petition using Palmer's parents as witnesses to your delusions." I thought of the thumb drive Derek had given me. The high-definition footage of 4 adults entering a property they didn't own, breaking a warning sign, and trespassing with moving boxes. I told Marcus about the recording. "Send it to me now," he ordered, "and Fred, do not engage with her. If she shows up, stay inside." The man on the porch eventually left the papers wedged in the doorframe and drove away. I retrieved them with gloved hands, reading the words Kelly had sworn under oath. She described me as unstable, prone to hallucinations, and unable to manage financial assets. She was asking the court to appoint her as my legal guardian. If she won, she wouldn't just get the villa, she would get everything I had ever built. I spent the night in the study, the glowing monitors of the villa security system my only company. I watched the approach road, half expecting a fleet of ambulances or more officers. But the mountain was silent. The lake was a dark void. I realized Kelly was desperate. The $5,000 she had tried to take was likely for the legal fees to start this war. She was doubling down on a losing hand, betting that her father would be too embarrassed to show a judge the truth of what he had done. She didn't know that the Fred Martinez who built half of San Diego wasn't afraid of a fight in a mahogany-paneled room. Saturday morning brought a different visitor. A small silver car pulled into the driveway. Out stepped a woman I hadn't seen in years, Elizabeth's younger sister Sarah. She looked toward the house with a face full of sorrow. I opened the door before she could knock. "Did she call you?" I asked, stepping onto the porch. "She told me you were sick, Fred," Sarah said, her eyes searching mine for any sign of the instability Kelly had described. "She said you were seeing things in the dark." I led her into the kitchen and made coffee. I didn't defend myself with words. I handed her the tablet and played the footage of the midnight haunting. I showed her the thermal sensors picking up Kelly and Palmer in my bed, the audio of them laughing about being natural pushovers. Sarah watched in silence, her hand covering her mouth. When the video ended, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "She's not Elizabeth's daughter anymore," Sarah whispered. "She's exactly what I allowed her to become," I replied, my voice tasting of cold coffee and regret. Sarah stayed for 3 hours, helping me organize the timeline of Kelly's demands over the last 3 years. We listed the checks, the cars, the tuition, and the dates she had refused to let me see her unless I was signing something. It was a ledger of exploitation. As Sarah left, she hugged me tightly. "Don't let her take your peace, Fred." I watched her drive away, but my attention was diverted by a flash of movement in the trees at the edge of the property. A dark blue minivan was idling at the bottom of the hill. Kelly was watching. She didn't come up the driveway. She just sat there, a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. The hearing was set for Monday morning in a small county courthouse. I arrived with Marcus Chen, both of us dressed in the sharp gray suits of men who intended to win. Kelly and Palmer were already there, sitting on a wooden bench in the hallway. Kelly looked different. She was dressed in a soft conservative cardigan, her hair tied back, playing the role of the worried, grieving daughter. When she saw me, she didn't flinch. She stood up and walked toward me, her face a mask of false sympathy. "Dad, it's not too late," she whispered, loud enough for the passing bailiff to hear. "We can drop all of this if you just come home with us and let Palmer's parents help you manage things." I didn't answer. I walked past her into the courtroom as if she were made of smoke. The judge was a stern woman with iron gray hair who looked like she had no patience for family drama. Kelly's lawyer opened with a dramatic tale of a father losing his grip on reality, described the high-tech hallucinations at the villa, and pointed to my impulsive donation of a multi-million-dollar asset to a charity as proof of diminished capacity. Then, Marcus stood up. He didn't give a speech. He simply asked to play a video file for the court. The room went dark, and the villa's living room appeared on the large monitor. The judge watched Kelly and Palmer drinking my wine and discussing how they would rearrange my life's work. She heard Margaret Thompson call me a pushover. Then, she saw the hallucination, the strobe lights, and the voice assistant. Marcus paused the video on a clear shot of the warning sign I had posted on the front door. "Your Honor, Mr. Martinez didn't have a breakdown," Marcus said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. He installed a state-of-the-art security system to protect his property from individuals who had already admitted their intent to seize it through manipulation. The hallucinations were a programmed response to a trespass. The judge looked at Kelly. The worried daughter was gone. Her face was twisted with a snarl of pure, unadulterated rage. "It was a trap," Kelly shouted, forgetting her lawyer's instructions. "He did it on purpose to humiliate us." The judge leaned forward, her eyes like flint. "So you admit you were there," she said quietly. "You admit you entered the property despite the sign, used a key that wasn't authorized, and attempted to move your in-laws into a home you didn't own." The hearing didn't last much longer. The petition for guardianship was dismissed with prejudice. The judge went a step further, issuing a stern warning to Kelly about the penalties for perjury and fraudulent filings. As we walked out of the courtroom, Kelly lunged at me, her fingers clawing at my suit jacket. "You've killed us," she shrieked. "Palmer's parents are being evicted. We're broke because of you." I stopped and looked at her, really looked at her for the last time. "You're not broke because of me, Kelly," I said, my voice as calm as the lake at dawn. "You're broke because you forgot how to build and only learned how to take." I turned my back and walked toward the exit. Palmer was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. He didn't even look up as I passed. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of boundaries. It has been 6 months since the courthouse steps. The villa at Lake Tahoe is quiet now, but it isn't empty. Every second weekend, the Second Chance Foundation uses the guest wing for their respite retreat program, giving families in transition a place to breathe the mountain air. I sit on the terrace and watch them, sometimes sharing a coffee with a man who has lost everything but his hope. I am 62 years old, and I have rediscovered the man I was before grief made me a target. I still miss Elizabeth every single day, but the pain no longer has a daughter's hand on the hilt of the knife. I have reclaimed her memory by living the way she actually would have wanted, with strength and self-respect. Kelly tried to call once, 3 months ago. She left a voicemail, her voice small and shaky, asking for a small loan to cover Palmer's legal fees from their own eviction. I listened to it once, then deleted it. I didn't feel anger, I didn't feel spite, I felt nothing at all. The connection had been severed by her own hand on that terrace. I spent this morning in the garden, planting new mountain laurels. The soil was cool and rich, and the sun was warm on my neck. My hands are calloused again, the way they were when I first started my business. It's a good feeling to know that you can still create something beautiful even after a demolition. A black SUV pulled into the driveway just after noon. It was Marcus Chen, coming up for a weekend of fishing. He stepped out of the car and looked at the lake, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in weeks. "Still the best view in California, Fred," he said, walking up to the porch. "The best view is the one you don't have to defend," I replied, handing him a cold drink. We sat on the terrace as the sun began its slow descent behind the peaks. The water was a sheet of orange and gold, and the only sound was the wind in the pines. I looked at the silver frame on the table beside me. Elizabeth looked back, her eyes full of the lake light. I have no grandchildren to hold. I have no daughter to walk through these doors. But I have my soul. I have my dignity. And I have a house that finally, truly, feels like home again. I reached out and touched the cool wood of the terrace railing. The battle was long, and the cost was high. But as the first star appeared over the water, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I am Fred Martinez. I am 62 years old, and I am finally completely at peace. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you are here.